Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel for you today. First, a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. That's also where you're going to find the chat tab, and that's where we want you to get to know your fellow audience members. Just let us know your thoughts or maybe where you're from. And by the end of the webinar, we will also be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around until the very end. Our topic today is continuous deployment, and I'm joined today by Nick Durkin, Field CTO at Harness, Tommy McClung, CEO and co-founder of Release Hub, Mike Bennett, Senior Director of Engineering at Everbridge, and moderating today's panel will be Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer here at Techstrong Group. So Mike, thank you for being here with us. I'm going to let you go ahead and take it from here.
All right, well, thank you all for being here today. I'm going to open up with a question for Nick. Kind of level set us a little bit, and then we'll go around and see if everybody has a similar opinion. But we've been talking about DevOps and CI/CD for a decade or more, judging by some of the folks here. There's a lot of gray in the attendee list here, so we've all been around the block a couple of times, as they say. And yet, CD remains elusive. It's been difficult to achieve. Of course, we can't even figure out if we want to call it continuous delivery or continuous deployment. Never mind exactly, which end of that debate you want to be on. But Nick, open us up a little bit and just kind of explain to folks what has made this so challenging over the years to achieve, because the concept's been around, but what holds us up?
Sure. I think it's actually a few things. One is that everyone's taken it as their own specific, say, snowflake of deploying. And so everyone assumes that they're extremely unique. And that might have been true 10 years ago because we didn't necessarily have as few patterns as we have today. But now, the way that people are deploying and the way that you're using common patterns, it's actually lent itself in the last few years to really become available. But to your point, if I've already built it, if I've already done it, I've extended my CI tool, I've used open source pieces, understanding how to get to full continuous delivery can look daunting. You can assume that you're that snowflake. And I think really understanding that there are a lot less patterns now than there were 10 years ago lends itself really well to actually achieve it now.
Tommy, do you agree with that? Do you think that that's where we are? Or folks just got a little intimidated and never came back?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that Nick said that everybody thinks their system and environment is a snowflake. And in some ways, people are right. Like everybody has a unique set of circumstances that they're deploying into, environments they're deploying into, frequency at which they want to deploy. And so it's easy to kind of fall back on this idea that, hey, I have to do this in my own unique way. But I think, as the cloud has become more programmatic, more standardization around open source, more tools that are at your ready, CD, can be possible. And, one of the things that we always talk about, and this will be a little bit self-serving because we do environments as a service, is environments are hard. Where things deploy into is a difficult problem. Not everybody's software stack is exactly the same. You might be running in AWS, somebody else is running in GCP, I'm running in Kubernetes, somebody else is running in ECS. So the target of where you're deploying is a moving target, and environments tend to be a difficult problem. So that's kind of step one. Where you deploy is difficult, and then making sure those deployments worked well and they're doing what they should do. There is some bespoke nature to that, where everybody has to observe their own stuff in their own way and what matters to them. So it tends to lean towards do it yourself, but a lot of tools and things that are becoming available are making it easier to standardize that practice. So I still think we're not all the way there to where CD is where everybody wants it to be, but we're further down the line.
Mike, do you agree with that? Are we kind of looking at a overnight success story that's been 10 years in the making, or what's going on?
I think it's not overnight. I think part of the problem with CD that most people tackle is confidence. I mean, you've got to be confident that when you commit something to source and you want to push it straight to production, that it's not going to break stuff. As we've moved into microservice environment, you've got, if you're not careful, you can't do continuous deployment of what is effectively a microservice monolith. You've got to figure out ways to decouple those services, to find out ways to say, well, I know this service depends on this service, but I can put this one out at a slightly faster cadence because I know that I'm going to continue just expanding my system, and anything I push out is not going to break it. So I think there's that. I think you've also got to have, as Tommy says, confidence in your environments. If you're pushing something out to your test environment and it works, you've got to be confident that that environment represents your prod environment. Because if you're not, then you don't even know what you're testing and you're doing like for like. So I think it's it's a slow journey, but I think confidence has got a lot to do with it. The other side of it is we want continuous deployment and customers don't. So we want to be able to push software out quickly and fast because smaller changes lead to less support, less bugs because there's smaller change sets going out. But customers don't want their product changing every 5 minutes or every hour if you're doing a true continuous deployment model. So it's finding that balance.
Nice. So let's talk about that balance and Tommy, I'm going to throw this your way. We initially talked about CI and CD like they were natural extensions of each other. Now you hear people talking about it as, well, maybe they should be more loosely coupled. And then other folks are saying, CI is for developers and CD is for ops people, and the two of them can just get out of each other's way and everybody will be fine. So what's your take on where are we on that collective journey or level of maturity?
Well, I do think it was somewhat of a mistake to couple those so tightly because one implies, if you say CI, CD, a lot of times what people have is CI. And then CD just gets a little bit of a hand wave, like, oh yeah, and CD. And so when you talk about CI, it's the build process, it's getting your assets created, doing your unit tests, getting your deployment ready essentially so that you're able to push those assets into their final destination. And that second part, the CD part, there's a lot that goes into that, right? It's where does it go, environments, how do you observe it? How do you roll it back if it fails? And I think that the industry kind of just said, oh, CI/CD is this magical solution. But the reality is I think we've coupled them too closely together and they're distinctly different problems. One is simpler, actually, in some ways. You just have to build, test, make sure you get your assets to whatever artifact repository they're going to go in, and then CD takes over from there, and that's just the big hand wave. So, I think that those two concepts have been tied together for simplicity's sake, but in reality's sake, the CD half of it is the more complex issue to deal with along the way.
Nick, do you see the same thing, or we got to rethink this all together?
No, I was talking to Alan Schimmel about this last time we were talking, and the reality is we put them together and we did a disservice. CI is getting code to artifact. CD's artifact all the way to customer, not just to production. And look, I come from an opinionated area. We started Harness as the first continuous delivery as a service platform. We thought that CI was even sorted and it was solved, right? Everyone does it phenomenally well. And we realized very quickly that there's a lot of benefits we could add from what we've built into CD and making it automated and making it useful. To that point, empowering the right people to do the right job. With CI, you can get going and get started as a developer right away. You can do your builds, you can turn it into artifact. You don't really need anybody's help doing it. But to get continuous delivery working, you need 4 groups inside your company. You need security, you need operations, you need people working on infrastructure, right? Potentially DevOps teams. This is not an easy task. And so really it's about empowering all of those groups, right? Making sure security can interact with the system the way they want to, making sure that the infrastructure can be operated accordingly by the people that know it the best, right? And this is, I think, where empowering that truly separates it. Like I said, you can start a trial with CI, get it up and running as a developer now. But to do true CD, to do it thoroughly and to do it at a company, it requires a lot of pieces. And that's where they are truly separate.
All right. Mike, do you agree we need to take a giant step back and maybe rethink this or start over?
I agree that they are separate concerns for sure. Continuous integration is literally about getting your artifact into your repository or wherever it is you're you're pushing it to. For us, continuous deployment is two-stage. I mean, the first stage is getting the artifacts into our production environment. That's not necessarily giving them to customers. It's just getting them out there, making sure they work, making sure that they're going to work. And then I consider CD two stages. It's deployment and release. So the first stage is getting the artifact out there, and the second stage is slowly but surely moving your customers over to that version of your artifact and making sure that it is stable. I like to think that, yes, we do need the team to do the infrastructure. We obviously need the security, we need the DevOps side, but I also believe that the teams should be responsible. So the development needs to be close to the team that is doing the work, and they should be responsible for getting that code out from their desktop environment all the way out to production and making sure that it's there, it's run, it's supported and it's stable for customers. So yes, they're separate, but also they're kind of not tightly coupled, they're loosely coupled, but sort of in the same environment is the way I see it.
All right. Nick, let me ask you this. You mentioned Snowflake, and by definition, Snowflake is manual, right? Because each one is a unique platform and you wind up doing a lot of manual processes. So how automated can continuous delivery get, or deployment, depending on your favorite buzzword spin on that? But, what should people be striving towards? What's the expectation that they should get to in terms of automation, or is it going to be different for each individual use case?
I think every use case, if we truly believe in CD and we believe what it's trying to achieve, it actually means automate everything. Right? That's where we should be heading. Now, are there things that people believe are in their way, say regulatory or change advisory boards or different manual pieces that have been put in place for a long period of time that have been stopping that quote unquote automate everything? Absolutely. Do we want to enable people to crawl, walk, run, right? Start where they're at today and then more and more automation throughout the process? Absolutely. But if we want to get to true continuous delivery, that means automate everything. That means taking for large financials that have to go to a change advisory board, that change advisory board shouldn't be approving deployments. If we're honest with each other, they should be approving changes to a pipeline. Right? There should be enough patterns that they're now just adjusting patterns that get deployed out. So how do we get to production, not what's getting to production? And so again, removing all of the humans that are actually getting in the way and removing all the pieces. I believe if we want to truly achieve it, it is automate everything.
Tommy, to that point, if it's about automate everything, and maybe we should start with the platforms and the environments that we're trying to manage here, because at the end of the day, people react to the situation that you put them in. And if we put them in a situation where the platforms are, they don't have APIs or there's no common set of interfaces, then they'll just default to what they know. So maybe, is the time to come and say, hey, we want to do continuous delivery, we want to do CI, but maybe we should think about the environment that we're trying to do it against first, and then get to the processes second. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Environments, I'm pretty close to this topic. So the challenge that you're running into, and Mike talked about this a little bit, is your staging environment, your pre-production environment, the same as your production, and is it going to behave the same way when it gets out there? And really what that comes down to do CD well, is you have to have confidence. You have to have confidence in your pipelines. You have to have confidence in your, the APIs that you're using to create your environment. You have to have confidence along the way. And let's be honest, not everything is, along this chain is as reliable as you would like it to be. So you have to build these systems assuming that there's going to be failures along the way, which makes it even more complicated. So you have the failure issues, and then you have consistency of environments that you need to deal with. And so, when we talk to customers about how do you fully get to CD, being confident that your environments, represent what you want them to is a huge part of that. And most organizations, and there's some really great advanced ones out there that have taken this further, still only have a few environments that are still manually being built. And so you might have CD where you're deploying into a staging environment that's fixed, or you might have CD that deploys into a QA environment that's fixed. But when you make a change to your infrastructure, is that continuously being updated, Or do you have to manually go in there and update it? And do you get drift between your environments? Those problems can really slow down CD. Like, you have to have a consistent landing spot for all of your assets first. And Mike said this, hey, we got to get our assets out to production. So step one is get them out there into an environment that's representative. And if it's production, hopefully it's, in a blue-green deployment or in a Canary deployment where the assets make it live. And then once you have confidence that that deployment is there, making it go in front of your users through whatever deployment rollout strategy you have, that all happens in production. But can you do that same thing in pre-production? Can you do that in your development environments? Because honestly, testing all of these things, a lot of organizations have one place where their, blue-green deployments work, or they have one place where their rolling deployments work. In dev and QA and staging, they don't. So the environments that you deploy into, making sure that the infrastructure is similar, making sure that the deployment strategies are similar, all are blockers that make CD really, really difficult. So we usually talk about that first with customers, is get your environments under control and then work on getting your assets, your pipelines, and everything into it.
Mike, do you agree with that? Because it kind of sounds like, what we're really saying is technical debt is the biggest impediment. So, do we need to knock off technical debt and then circle back on all this stuff?
I think what Tommy says is absolutely spot on, actually. The environment situation is the key thing. If you can't be sure that what you're deploying is going to work in every single environment, and it's not just dev, test, and prod. Prod is usually super region 1, 2, and 3, sub region 1 and 2 for your backup and your failover site. So it's not, prod is not just one environment. I mean, in our prod 6 environments. They've all got to be identical. They've all got to run the same. You've not only just got deployments into those, you've also got to handle failovers and all of the other side of things, which they're the next logical step in continuous deployment. But technical debt, yes, to a degree. There's different levels of technical debt. But I think stage one in any confidence in this area has got to be, I'm going to push this thing out, I'm going to test it, and I know that that's going to run in production in the same way I've run it here. And that goes from not just the software, but the process.
Yeah. Nick, you talked about patterns. And so define what those are a little bit, if you would, because some folks are saying, I should just go to Kubernetes and I'll have a standard API everywhere and all my problems will be solved. But or did I just add to my technical debt because now I got another set of platforms and all this other stuff isn't going to go away anytime soon? So how do I kind of work the middle?
Well, I'll give something fun. So, I look at applications, I think of them as airplanes. And what's interesting at every company that I've been to, regardless of where and how they build their airplanes, right, and how they build their applications, they tend to all build them individual runways, which is an interesting thing, meaning they each of them build a new pipeline how to get their specific application up and out. And it's interesting because we would never do that in any other industry, right? We would define runways that could handle A380s, massive airplanes, as well as Cessnas. And we would make it so that we can use them accordingly. And you might have a few different patterns that would be able to do that. And this is really what I mean by patterns, is that we have enough of the complexity taken care of, with the infrastructure. So which infrastructure can we use? What containerized technologies are we using? Where are we hosting them? And we know enough of those patterns that we can actually now define pipelines that are really that ability to take any of your different applications through. So it shouldn't be for 5,000 applications, it shouldn't be 5,000 different pipelines. It should be 22, 26. And I only say that because we've got customers that went from 5,000 applications and 5,500 pipelines to get them there. God knows why there's more than the applications. To now they've got 26 because there are standards that people can follow, and you can actually use a template approach, a do not repeat yourself kind of approach, the same approach that any of our best engineers would actually use, and now start applying that in technology that works today.
All right. A little science goes a long way. Tommy, we got a question from the audience, and it's basically goes back to automation, but it's about rollback. And essentially it says, how do I roll things back with the CD platforms? Because inevitably something will go wrong, or as one fellow said, it's one thing to be wrong, it's another thing to be wrong at scale. So how do I kind of take this and, roll it back? Are the tools mature in that regard? Help this fellow out.
Well, it's pretty bespoke from what we've seen. Everybody kind of has their own definition of what a rollback means. But, in the ideal state, we prophesize this idea of what we call rainbow deployments. And if you think about a blue-green deployment, it's kind of the basic version of that. So you have your blue side, which is production, it's running, it's serving traffic. Then you have your green side, which is your new deployment that you're releasing, whatever that might be. And you want that to become active when you are confident that it's good. That strategy works decently well if you're doing deployments at a pace that will allow for your main side to release all of its connections and become available. The green side be available in a reasonable amount of time, depending on the frequency of your deployment. So I think what we've been able to accomplish with rainbow deployments is the ability to have blue, green, red, yellow, purple, orange, whatever color. So every deployment actually deploys into a new environment. And if for whatever reason something doesn't work, you just switch back to the old environment. So those strategies allow you to deploy as fast as you want. And if something goes wrong, you're not having to recreate, you're just pointing traffic back to an older version that was live prior to the newest change going out. Now, that's a pretty advanced topic, but that is the best approach that we've seen to rollbacks. Is you're not just saying, oops, we made a mistake, grab all the assets that we had in a prior deployment and then redeploy them. You actually have a running environment with the old stuff still running in it that you just point traffic to. And so there's a complexity in that, which requires you to be really good at, creating environments and replicating what you're doing. But that strategy we've seen to be one of the very best rollback strategies there is. I think that that's a pretty mature topic, but it's a goal for folks to get to, which is, when you want to do a quick rollback and something is broken, you can't have downtime. You want it to go as quick as possible, which assumes that those, other versions are live and running somewhere so that you can get it back as quick as you can. What we see a lot is somebody deploys, it's broken. They're like, oops, we need to go fix it. They do another deployment to kind of replace it with their old assets. And then they wait for whatever timeline it takes to get that all the way through their pipelines. And so you have this period of time where users aren't getting what they want. Yes, you do roll back, but there's a delay in that rollback, and that delay, could cost you revenue, money, unhappy users, whatever that might end up being. So rollbacks, are an advanced topic. Like if you can do CD, first of all, great, you're doing a great job. But if you've now instrumented to the level where you can say, I want to move back to where I was before, you're at kind of the hierarchy of needs, very at the top of that pyramid, right? So it's the ultimate goal. And that also implies, and this will be the last thing I talk about, is the ability to know it's broken, which observability is a big part of CD. There's companies that specifically focus on, observability as a core concept. How do you know to roll back, right? That's another question. You got to know that it's broken. And a lot of times people leave broken stuff up there. They should have rolled back and they didn't because they have no idea that it's broken. So anyway, lots of topics in and around this.
All right. Glad you guys brought it up. So Mike, what Tommy kind of described, at least to my untrained ears, is, the CD version of pets versus cattle. We want to be able to drop off cattle whenever we need to. But to his point, that's the top of the pyramid. So are there steps along the way that people should be thinking about with CD? I mean, how do I get to what Tommy described as nirvana, and what's along the way?
It depends on what environment you're using. I mean, we implement a strategy. We've gone blue-green. We've gone blue-green ever since we went into cloud. The nice thing about blue-green is that your rollback strategy can take 1 to 2 minutes to take something that's broken to something that is working again. There's complexities with that. Sometimes you can't necessarily roll back depending on your what you just pushed out. The thing you roll back to may not be compatible, and it may break. So sometimes you've got to be able to roll forward. It's all about baby steps. I mean, the first thing is maybe you don't roll out your entire customer stack as soon as you do a deployment. So one of the processes that I'm pretty keen on is the Canary process. So the idea is the same with Blue Green. You drop your pods into production, and then instead of moving all of your traffic over, you can move your traffic over in phases. And then that adds into your observability step where you say, okay, I'm going to split my customers into 10 groups, and I'm going to start off with the first 10%, and I'm going to move those over to the new system, and I'm going to put all of my metrics and monitoring and things that I check for in production, and I'm going to watch those things for the next 5 minutes. And if nothing happens and I don't see any errors coming through, then I'll go to my next 10%. And you can do that over the course of an hour and slowly but surely move your customers over from your old release to your new release. And at any point during that, you may start hitting problems. But at that point, you're able to do a fast rollback, and you've only impacted a percentage of your customers rather than everybody. That's like the next stage. There's nothing to stop you, first of all, going, well, I'm going to upgrade a customer as soon as I've got stuff out, and then see what happens. And then, you can be manually observing things. You can have the team watching for errors, watching whatever logs and auditing tools that they're using to see what's going on. And then after a while, people go, well, this is crazy. Why am I doing what a computer can do? And then they start building in the automated observability side of things. And then observability changes depending on what you're pushing out, because in the microservice world, you could be pushing out front-end code, you could be pushing out back-end code, you could be pushing out API code, each of which have got different interactions. So the things that you observe have got to be different, which could potentially make snowflakes out of everything unless you build it correctly and build in some way of saying to somebody, you can actually do this. You define your monitor, your observer, and give it to me, and I will run your observer during this generic process. So I mean, these things don't happen overnight. I mean, we got to continuous deployment. It took us several years to get there, and we don't do it continuously. We do it daily because we don't want to be pushing out constantly, having things queuing up behind each other. But this isn't an overnight step. You have to build it. You have to build your pipelines. You've got to convince product management that I've got to build these pipelines now, sacrificing current velocity for future velocity. Because if you give me some time to build this out now, I'll be able to get stuff out the door faster for you in the future. So yeah, I think it's a baby steps process. I think you've got to listen to what people have done, look at best practices, and you'll see that everything is fairly consistent. It's a fairly consistent way. There's lots of things, flavors of the same thing. The rainbow idea is great because it means you can have lots of different versions to get to. And I think if you're at the stage of continuous deployment, I mean literal continuous deployment, then that you have to get to that model. It depends on your frequency.
I think somebody in the military said if you want to go really fast, you have to start out going really slow and figure out exactly what you're doing. Nick, both Tommy and Mike said the words observability. So the question I have for you is observability something that I build and deploy separately from CD? You hear about all these observability platforms that are out there, or by definition, does a CD platform need to have observability capabilities built into it, and I don't need to go buy a separate platform? It should just be a feature of the platform.
Great question. And I think regardless of whether it's built in or whether it's external, I think the signal has to be used. And we're using it with humans today. And, I want to, we've all kind of talked about this kind of crawl, walk, run approach. I want to use the idea of confidence. This is one of the big things I talk about. I say it's not people, process, or technology, it's confidence. So I love that Mike brought out. But really, when we talk about how we do these complex rollback strategies and how we're going to use the observability piece, it's about risk and confidence. And how risky is that change and how much confidence do we have? And being able to tie those together is what's important. We should be using observability. This is exactly how you should measure it. But honestly, if we're going to reach the velocity that we're talking about, if we want to get to true continuous delivery, there's not enough people sitting behind a screen, in our NOC trying to figure this out. There's not enough alerts that we can go and create because we then have to know what's going to be broken before we know what to look for. So instead, having artificial intelligence, having machine learning look at things for you so that it can alert you when there are differences, when there are deviations, regardless of what deployment type you do. The thing is, we've got a ton of different folks. Some are only doing rolling. Some are doing blue-green, right? Others are doing canary and splitting traffic. Others are doing this with feature flags, being able to turn on a feature just for a very specific customer and truly test it at the most minor and granular, again, risk versus reward. But with all of these, we have to verify that it's good. And I think that's why I said it's not just from, and I like the way that Mike put it, it's not just from artifact to production, but then there's that second stage, which is to customer. And being able to make sure that those are operating at scale, that they're getting what they need, we're delivering the updates at the right times, but ultimately not, sacrificing quality. That's where it becomes difficult to truly get to that automation if you don't insert that observability into your actual continuous delivery. It has to be part of the automation, because if you say, great, I'm going to deliver it, and then I'm going to have people look at screens and figure out how to roll back, that can't be part of it either. When someone asks specifically about the rollback strategy, this should be as automated as your rollout. And the only thing that gets in people's way traditionally is state. All right? Sometimes we make some really complex changes to the database and some really complex changes to state. But even those, if we really wanted to, we could automate the rollout and rollback of those as well. And so these are the things that if we truly want to achieve it, you need a platform that can handle all of those pieces across the board. So you have the confidence and you can remove the risk.
All right. Tommy, Nick mentioned the famous buzzword AI. Do we need AI to make all this work? I mean, have we reached a point of complexity where we have to have some AI to save us from ourselves? And what is the state of AI and CD these days?
Well, I mean, you want to talk about the hierarchy of needs here, right? Like AI on top of your observability platform is probably at the very, very tip of the spear, but incredibly important. There's actually a question that says, what's the most crucial step in CD that we need to be careful about for a beginner, right? So AI is probably like, PhD level concept where a lot of people probably are just struggling with the very beginning. I want to make sure I answer the question, which is, where is AI? There's lots of platforms out there that will say, hey, we can do observability. We'll look at your data. We'll look at your logs. We'll find anomalies and tell you and let you go, do whatever you need to do with those signals to pull it off. I think, those platforms are great and they'll help with that problem. But I think, Mike was kind of talking about this a little bit in observability. It's knowing, as a developer who builds something, you're a developer, you're writing some feature, being able to express what matters in that feature so that when it makes its way out into production, into the observability platform, that signal is paid attention to. I think it's a really complicated problem because unless you have the signals, you don't know what to look for, right? And so there's this chicken and egg problem of observability, and even Nick touched on this. Like, if you just had a knock full of people looking at the alerts, you're looking at what right? It's like, oh, we know that this part of the system is broken. This is critical if that breaks, but you stick your finger in the dam over here and water starts squirting out over here. You didn't even know to look. Those are where I don't think humans are going to be capable of dealing with that problem, especially as these systems get so complex. The cloud is, every day the cloud gets more complicated. You have AWS issues, you have your software issues, you have your infrastructure. There's so many different ways that something can fail. It's kind of silly to think that we as humans are going to be able to sort it. So it's going to be a kind of like the DevOps mentality of like shifting left and getting developers more involved. I think developers are going to need to be involved in saying, hey, I think that this is what matters with this feature. And that's going to need to make its way all the way out into the observability platform. But then the observability platform is going to need to look at stuff that you didn't even think about so that it can signal that back to you and say something is different here. Whether a human needs to go intervene or you automatically roll back, go do it. Now, I think if you're at the point where you're thinking about that, you're at the very, very top of the hierarchy of needs of CD. Like, you've got a good deployment strategy, you're continuously pushing out, you have rollback strategies, and you're dealing with those issues in a big way. Just to start at the beginning, I think, and I wanted to answer this question so it doesn't go by, what's the most crucial step in CD that we need to be careful about? To me, it kind of goes back to making sure that when you're deploying, you have confidence in your environments. Like, I think if you don't have that, everything else kind of falls apart on the other side of CD. So ensuring that your staging, your production, your development environments, you have confidence in your approach to getting those out there and to reproducing them and to pushing them out. That's kind of the answer to that question in my mind. So I didn't want that to go by, because we're talking about really, really advanced things. And I think most people listening are probably at the very beginning and want to know concrete things that they can do. Getting into Kubernetes helps. Making sure that you're doing good CI first, like get CI sorted. Then, where are you going to deploy? Getting your arms around templating those systems, using Helm if you're using Kubernetes to codify what you're doing. There's really straightforward things that you can do to make sure that you're getting your environments deployed in a consistent way. Do that first and then work on the higher order things.
All right. Well, speaking of all that, Mike, we have a question in the chat session. I'm going to direct it to you. And it simply states, that sounds expensive. I have no idea what part of this conversation that they're applying that to, but it all does sound fairly expensive. So is there a way to get at all this in a way that's affordable? And, where do you kind of start? Because I don't think everybody has $1 billion to throw at things.
Yeah, I think that was when Tommy was talking about Raymo deployments, people were kind of going, yeah, that's multiple environments, that's going to be expensive. I mean, there's always a cost. I mean, there is always a cost to these things. We talk about environments and we talk about deployments, and you can have multiple deployments in the same environment. You don't have to have multiple environments. So when you're talking blue-green strategies, if we're talking in the containerized world, we drop a new distribution out which contains a number of running pods, and we spin those up alongside our existing pods. Now, as long as you've got the resources available in your Kubernetes nodes to be able to handle the amount of traffic that you want to be able to do, you can manage the expenses, because you can say, well, maybe I've got 6 production pods right now, and I'm going to push out my next release. So that's now I've got to be able to cope with 12 production pods in a blue-green environment. So that comes down to, well, as I start switching traffic across, I can start scaling down my older pods, and so I'm not spending all of that resources to keep everything running. You don't have to keep everything running in a blue-green deployment. You don't have to have 12 pods running for a period of time just to do this blue-green. There's nothing to stop you saying, okay, I'm doing a 1-hour canary. And I like canaries, so I'll probably harp on about canaries a little bit during this call. But I'm doing a 1-hour canary out to my customers. At the end of that canary, I'm confident enough now to say that release is stable. It may not be, but right now I'm going to say I'm confident that release is stable. I can scale down my old version, and that's not deleting it. That's just scaling down the number of pods to 0. Now, an hour later, I may find out that actually there was a fundamental problem, and then we've made a decision as a group to roll back. We scale up the deployment. We're not pushing out new deployments because the pods still exist in the environment. We scale those up, we reroute traffic, we scale down the new deployment. So you can manage the cost. You don't have to have environment upon environment. You want to have in multiple environments for failover. Google decides oddly they're going to shut their US central system down for essential maintenance. You've got to be able to move your customers over to a backup region. The unlikeliness of that is high, but it's possible. Things happen, things can break. You may have something in one environment that is broken, but it's working in your backup environment, so you can reroute customers' traffic into that. So there's a cost there. But you can manage it. Part of my job is making sure that we do manage those costs. Make sure that your containers are optimized. Make sure that you're not asking for too many resources when you don't really need them. One of the things we're looking at right now is startup times. We have our pods that run, and they're probably using 30-40% of our actual resources, but we need that extra 60% for them to start up. Otherwise, they're too slow to start up. So you look for strategies, and that's why developers and DevOps people should be working together on these things, which I think is a theme that we all agree on, is to get these things so the development teams are thinking not only what does my code do, but how is my code going to run? Mm-hmm. And I'll stop talking so other people can say things.
Nick, do you have anything to add on the cost side of it? Because it does seem to me that cost is probably one of the issues we don't talk enough about in terms of it's self-limiting, right? If it's expensive, people don't do it. So can we get those costs down in a way that makes CD more accessible to a larger number of people?
Sure. I think our highest cost, and I'll even bring it out to the team here if they disagree, which is it's our engineers' time. Like, that's the only finite resource we have. And if I'm wasting it having them babysit deployments, literally looking at screens, trying to figure things out, like, that's a horrible use of their time. If I'm doing that, waiting for them to wait for their tests to run and their builds, like, that's a horrible waste of time. You know, every invention that we've had in our world in the last 100 years has been to make people's jobs easier, right? That should be what it's about. And so the costs, we wouldn't be in business if they didn't outweigh the expense, right? Or the benefit. And the reality is that's what it should be. We should be taking away the worst parts of people's jobs so that it's a no-brainer to spend, right? And those costs should be monitored, and those costs should be, looked at. And in fact, I'll even bring it to this one. We talk about shift left. I think it's about empowering people with the right information, not necessarily giving them more work to do. And so even giving cost information and usage information to the engineers that can actually affect change when it's useful, not months later when we've already got a bill. Like, those are the types of things we need to do that actually drive costs lower, right? We're going to actually deploy things more efficiently because we know about them. We're going to use the right size servers. We're going to turn down our non-production infrastructure because we know we can save a ton of cost. But it's hard to do that if we're not even given that information. So at that point, our engineers' time, that's the most expensive thing I think we have.
All right. Tommy, add to that, are we approaching something that feels like maybe a crisis because we don't have that many engineers? They're expensive to hire and maintain, and yet we are moving to all these microservices-based applications with different components that will be flying around, and it's getting harder than ever to keep track of what's deployed and where. So is this kind of starting to shape up to be maybe a recipe for disaster we need to get in front of?
Yeah, I mean, that's the existential issue here. I think Nick hit the nail on the head there. The time spent by engineering organizations to deal with continuous integration, continuous deployment, operations is, if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, and I was previously the CTO of a public company, and when I looked at our spend on the cloud, you'd get a sticker shock. You'd be like, oh man, that's expensive. But then when I looked at the headcount spend to manage that infrastructure, I wanted to take a vacation because it paled in comparison. And we were a B2C, high volume, high traffic organization, right? This is a public company, millions of unique visitors a month, high infrastructure costs. But then I went and looked at how much are we spending on all of this just to manage it. It was 3-4 times as much as the cloud spend. So where the optimization and efficiency should go, and the thing wasn't that I didn't want to have those employees and I didn't want to spend that money. I just wanted their time spent on something important that would actually drive revenue or make our customers happier. But instead, we were spending all of our time figuring out like whether or not we should roll something back or building a new, we had this crazy issue where it literally took us 6 months to build a new environment because we didn't template it and we didn't make it easy to reproduce. So I think those are the things that if you're a leader in the engineering world, before you start worrying about, yes, look at your cloud spend, see how much everything costs you, but really take a step back and say, okay, where's my overall spend and where can I really make improvements in value created by whether it's the cloud or my engineers? That's the first step. And I think if you get your arms around that, it's going to force you into thinking about CD and CI in a really meaningful way. And yeah, it probably does slow you down at first because you got to, in order to go fast, you got to go slow. But there's a lot of stuff out there that's making this a lot easier. Harness does a great job. There's Argo CD that's out there. There's Release that's out. There's a lot of tools now that are happening to make the world less hands-on and more automated. And the cloud is at a place where it's possible to do a lot of that. Now, once you got CD in place, go worry about, where's all my workload running? How much does it cost me to deploy things? Like, there are lots of steps that you can take on all of those things, especially if you're in the cost optimization game in AWS. You want to buy RIs, you want to do all sorts of stuff. You can really shrink your bill over there, but you can't shrink your employee costs if you don't figure out how to make them more efficient. You just can't. And so I think that's where you got to start. And you will have a crisis. I was the CTO of a company that we were in a crisis of cost and inability to move fast. And we had to slow down for about 18 months before we could go fast again. And it was painful, but on the other side, we could do CD and we were much more efficient, and it was totally worth it. Organizationally, it's really hard to take a step like that, especially as a public company. And so, you've got to be an articulate leader that convinces everybody that going slow for a while will enable you to go fast. And the good news is there's a lot of things that'll help you go faster now than there was when I tried to do this. So it's probably not a 2-year journey for a lot of people, but some it might be, depending on how bad your ecosystem and your manual processes are. It's tough. So there could be an existential crisis for particular organizations. And are we at a tipping point? I think we could be, but I also think there's a lot of things that are happening to combat that because the industry knows it's not sustainable.
All right, you guys agree with that? Are we approaching something that feels like an existential crisis, or will technology save us from ourselves?
My hopes that technology saves us, but I've spent my time literally building AI and ML to, track things from Tomcat and WebSphere all the way up to, all the new stacks that we have now. But to that point, you've got a ton of people that shouldn't be wasting their time doing these things, and we should be making our employees' jobs easier. So every company's going to hit a different time.
Are we getting to the point where maybe someday we won't need engineers to do all this? I once asked a fella, I said, what's the difference between you and Google? And he laughed and he said, they have engineers and I have administrators. So, can we get to the point where CD is something that an administrator can do? Mike, what do you think?
It depends on what you mean when you say, can an administrator do? So can an administrator run pipelines? Sure. Technically speaking, pipelines should be able to run themselves. We should be at a point where we have enough intelligence in our code base and enough intelligence in our systems where we say these things just trigger automatically. If we've got confidence in our integration tests, our environments, our unit tests, our deployment build strategies and everything else, there's no reason why we even need human intervention. Are we away from that? Yes, we are. Observability has got to be spot on. And the challenge with observability, as you're putting new code out, you may not know what you want to observe. Observability is great for stuff that you know. That's what regression tests are for. Have I broken something that I knew worked when I push this release out? But do I know that the thing I just pushed out is going to work the way I expect it to work? Until I actually see it break, I may not know that. So 90%, sure. I think we can have to the point where things will run on themselves. Administrators won't be able to build those things yet. Eventually we'll get drag and drop and GUI tools. In fact, we're even getting those right now, where people can build their own pipelines. But they've got to have a certain amount of knowledge as to what it is doing and how it works.
All right. Tommy, you brought up the notion of going slower. So that brings us immediately to security, because these guys are running around saying, hey, we need to go slower to make things more secure, but can we go fast and have secure environments, or do we need to figure out how to make things more secure by slowing things down?
Well, you don't want to slow things down. And, typically I think security ends up getting the gatekeeper, kind of label put on it. But I think, similar stuff is going to happen and is happening in security, DevSecOps, where security is getting integrated into the entire CI/CD process, right? Where you've got vulnerability scanning that's going on with images. You have customers of ours will do things like deploy an environment, run their security testing against those environments before they go to production, before they actually put their code out into the wild. So I think the answer to security and going fast is it's got to integrate in to your pipeline process, whatever you want to call it, your CI/CD process, so as it doesn't become the gatekeeper. And I've worked in organizations where it absolutely is the gatekeeper. Like security had to look at it, had to play around with it, had to manually do their testing, had to look at the images and audit them manually. And the reason they had to do that is the tooling wasn't there to automate it. And so, again, this is probably top of the hierarchy of needs, right? If you can't get your images out into an environment that works well, you're not thinking about this just yet. But as you do start getting more mature, integrating that DevSecOps mentality into your approach from software developers all the way out into your steps of your CI, your CD, it's the critical part of going fast. You can't go fast and just be like, I don't care about security. Like, it's like, whatever, ship it, hope somebody doesn't find that we've got a vulnerability. Like, that's the last thing a CTO will hear before they're shown the door when they get fired because they didn't take it seriously. So, I think the key is getting it integrated. It's got to be integrated. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now with like vulnerability scanning and security audit testing, compliance. Security is code, compliance is code. All of these things are being created in a way so they can fit into the deployment strategies that you've got. And it really is just a function of, get them integrated into the platform so that it works.
All right. Nick, is our goal, therefore, to get rid of the phrase DevSecOps and just assume that security is part of the equation anyway, and maybe we don't need this terminology, which is kind of cumbersome at the very least? Or does it just kind of give us a necessary buzzword that we need to make sure the security people are paying attention?
I think it's a buzzword to make sure that people feel included. I look at it the same way: risk and confidence. And security is all about making sure that we remove risk, right? Deploying faster, being confident in doing it. I think one of the biggest problems we had is that we'd find out about CVEs and vulnerabilities 2 weeks after they're running in production. Why? Because that's when they get ran. To your point, we should know about these things. When I talk about shift left, it's bringing that information to the people who can affect change when it's valuable. Right when I build that code base, we should be scanning it. Right when I turn into a container, we should scan it. Run those DAS scans, articulate against them, normalize, deduplicate that information, bring it to people the way it's valuable for them to actually take action. If we do any of this just to let us know that it's there, great. But this should all about being taken action. And that's the thing. So if we don't, every pipeline has to be secure. Anyone who says, I'm just going to use my open source stuff, I'm going to use my CI tools, I don't care about security, they'll do that for a very, very little bit of time. And then they'll realize we have to govern it. We have to secure it. It has to be audited. And that's the hard part. And that should be really, somebody asked about it, what are the important parts? If you don't think about it from the ground up with those mentalities of being secure, you will put yourself on the back foot later. It has to be secure. It has to be compliant. It has to be governed. And you should be bringing that information to the people when it's valuable. And so that's my entire mantra. I love it. Tommy, thank you for, I think that's the best way to put it. So no, I think that's it. We have to.
And I think that phrase DevSecOps was created it's an awareness thing, right? Like, it is DevOps, but they're just like, hey, security has to be a part of it. And so I think that phrase is DevOps, but it's just like, hey, don't forget about security. It's really important in this equation.
All right. Mike, do you think that we're kind of lost in a vicious cycle here around security? And I'll describe it from my humble perspective, but it's like security guys run around, they discover all these vulnerabilities, they throw it over the wall, the developers spend all their time trying to figure out which of these vulnerabilities actually matter, and then they go and fix those. Of course, if they had fixed those before they went into production, the security guys never would have found it in the first place, and it just keeps going around in this infinite loop. So where can we break that cycle?
I think both Nick and Tommy have touched on this already. You break the cycle by bringing it into your scanning as part of your CI. There's so many tools out there now that you can use as part of your build processes to source code scan, to library scan, to container scan. There's so many places where this stuff happens. So the security team are auditing you as opposed to the security team are coming to you saying, we found this bug. I mean, I would imagine everybody on this call, and probably most of the people who are listening to this call, were aware of the Log4j vulnerability back in December and the scramble to get that done. And in a DevSecOps environment, the impact should be practically zero because you're aware of these vulnerabilities in your libraries before you ship them, and you see these things coming up. You put dates on them to be fixed by, and you get them done. We hit that. We didn't have to do a deployment that day because we have DevSecOps running, and it was just a quick check, confirm everything, half an hour, done, moved on with our day. And that comes back to Nick's point of we're not wasting people's time looking into these things because we've got confidence in our systems, we've got confidence in our processes. And we know that these things are happening as just part of day to day. It's just the business that we're in, and we have to do it because customers expect our software to be secure. Customers expect our software to be proven to be secure, and they'll want to see the audits that we are doing the things that we say we do. And it's incumbent upon us to do that in order to keep our customers confident in what we deliver to them.
All right, guys, we each get a minute here, but what's your best advice to folks? Starting with Nick, you got a full minute to say to somebody, this is the one thing you should be thinking about right now to get all this job done.
No, I think if we think about our people's time, if we think about empowering our engineers to do their best work, right? I wouldn't have a plumber doing my electrical work, but I would empower him to know where, the wires are and the plumbing needs to go. And so I think that's important that we actually truly allow people to shift left by giving them the right information. I think we empower the security teams to do their work. We empower the infrastructure teams to do their work and have a system that gives you confidence. That's the intention. And I think I'm going to use Mike's term, confidence, as the best way to approach this, is truly have confidence in what you're doing and do it through automation.
All right. Confidence is everything. Tommy, what's your best advice to folks?
I mean, don't build this yourself. Like, there are so many things out there that make this easier. And one of the things that we run into all the time are teams that go and try to build this all in-house. And I know it's a little bit self-serving because I run a company that helps with this problem, but it's the reason why the company exists, is that I saw how much waste goes into building, deployment strategies, CI/CD. There's tons of stuff out there that you can leverage to make yourself go faster. And it's fun. I think the reason why a lot of organizations end up building this stuff in-house is it's actually a really fun problem to solve. Like, engineers are intellectually stimulated by building out CI/CD and worrying about deployments and worrying about observability and rollbacks. It's a really interesting place to spend your time. But again, for most companies, it's not massive value add. The value add is going fast, right? So your goal is to figure out how to go fast as much as you can. And if that means go off and, for whatever reason, there's a reason why you have to build some of this because it's faster than you could do it otherwise, then sure. But otherwise, leverage the work of the organizations and open source projects that are out there that help you go fast. Because we've walked into so many customers where they've done it on their own, and it gets old. It's hard to maintain. They spend a lot of time and money on it. And if they leverage things that were out there, they'd be focused on customer work. I mean, that's my biggest piece of advice. All
right, Mike, coming to you. We have time is money, and we have don't do this at home. So what do you got?
The thing I would add to that, if you want to get continuous deployment working, especially in the microservice environment, you have to decouple. You cannot do continuous deployment on what people call microservices, but they are a microservice monolith. So if I've got 30 microservices in my environment, but I have to deploy all 30 every time I want to do a release, that's never going to work. You have to be able to say, I'm going to do my database every day. How do I do that? Well, I think about how I decouple my database changes from my code, so I'm not causing backward compatibilities. That'll be my first thing that is kind of outside of continuous deployment, but a key point. The second point is environments. Everything has to be able to be the same. We're looking more at using dev in container as well, and building containers. So when people are working on their desktops, they're working in the same environments as their code would be running in dev, in test, in stage, in prod. It's all the same. So most people might be using Windows for development, Macs for development, Linux for development. Stick your dev in a container and you're building a container, then you know that as soon as you push it out to whatever tooling is your preference, it's going to work in the same way. So consistency.
Guys, I got to jump this back to Cody to exit, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Cody, take us home.
Well, thank you to Tommy, Nick, Mike, and Mike for joining us today. We really appreciate all of your insights on this topic. I would like to remind our audience that this session was recorded. You should be receiving an email with a link to access that recording on demand. You can also find this webinar living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. So we do have those 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give out. Our first winner is Pratap K. Our second winner is Sure M. Our third winner is Fred H. And our fourth and final winner is Jaweed M. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder. So everyone, thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate you spending your time here. We do ask for one extra moment of your time to fill out a brief post-webinar survey that'll pop up on your screen here in just a moment. But otherwise, we do hope to see you at an upcoming Techstrong Learning workshop or webinar. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. And to our panelists, thank you once more.
Bye, guys.